Today we have another episode about the Biel Chess Festival, the famous
Nice.
tournament in Switzerland that Arne and I will participate in this summer. I wanted to show one of the best and most instructive games that happened in the event, and it was between Magnus Carlsen and David Navara at Biel 2018.
Great. Yes. I think I don't know actually, but I think it was the first time that Magnus was in Biel. I can't actually promise. I think it was the first time. And yeah, it was quite a spectacular event. ChessBase was actually highly involved in this and commentating and all of those things. I think there's still a lot in the archive if you will go through the news channel if you want to. So, yes, I'm super curious. I don't know about the game, but I heard that David Navara was also in peak performance in that time. 2,741 rating points. That is quite something. All right.
Yeah, so the game started like with d4 and knight f6. Magnus is white, Navara is black, and we start off with a queen's gambit declined type of position. So Magnus goes c4, e6.
Mm-hmm.
These positions, we see them a lot. We know these pawn structures a lot from all the previous lessons. But here, black also developed a bishop with check to bishop to b4, and this transposes to a Ragozin defense, as opposed to the typical positions with the bishop on e7.
Mm-hmm.
So here the positions are slightly different. Now black kicked off white's bishop, forced the trade, and so far there's all natural moves. The most interesting part of this game is going to be the middle game, which we are headed towards. For now, everything is typical. Magnus develops, Navara also develops. And Navara pursued the c5 pawn break in the center. This is the main plan for black in this position and in these types of positions in general.
Mm-hmm.
And Carlsen goes for an interesting decision to capture. Of course, there's nothing wrong with simply castling. That probably would have been the more typical line. But he decided to capture. This might look a bit,
Scary.
dangerous to open up to open up the d file, but really there's nothing really dangerous about it. Even if black goes rook d8 at some point, the queen doesn't mind developing and then just castling
Okay.
afterwards. So nothing scary here. Instead, Navara went with the knight, so trying to take the pawn with the knight instead. In this game, black regains the pawn soon, even though Carlsen has also been on the black side of this position, so he has played this as black before, where his game continued with white playing c6.
That was
And after
exactly my
knight to
thought, yeah.
e5, sorry?
That was exactly my thought. Like c6 looks very tempting.
Yeah, it's a typical idea, especially in those positions where you have an extra pawn for that side. The game continued with knight to e5 there and had some interesting complications, but usually that just ends up with black recapturing the pawn like this, and then you play against that weak pawn.
Mm-hmm.
But in this particular game, Carlsen didn't go for it, and he just castled instead, trying to focus more on the development and the center. So then black recaptured, knight goes to b5. So the whole idea of this is that he wants to reposition it somewhere better. Even though it looks like the knight is trying to go to c7, it really doesn't bring much because the rook will just retreat and then the knight might risk getting trapped here in the future. So instead, the knight goes over here. So that was just a repositioning of the knight, also opening the c file for the rook a bit more. All of this has been played before, but here it was the moment where Navara came up with what I think was a novelty at the time, because that seems to be the first game where this was played.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier, black used to go either bishop back or knight back to prevent b4 from happening and winning the piece. But in this game, he went with b5, which I think looks pretty logical and pretty good,
Yeah.
to attack the bishop. Now, with his next move, bishop to e2, Carlsen provokes black's next sequence. So black played e5 here, attacking the knight, and this looks really dangerous already for white, just because it looks like the pieces are getting pushed back. I think this is the first interesting and tactical moment in the game. What would you play here? And at home, feel free to pause the video and think about the position yourself too.
Yeah, I immediately have an idea. I don't know if it's good. I have to calculate, of course, but knight c6 almost looks as if it's possible. If the queen takes on c6, we can play a3. The bishop has to go back. And with b4, we would get the piece back, I guess.
I see what you're doing, but you can basically do that without moving the knight to c6. Like, as in, if you're going to give up
Yeah,
that
I see.
knight, if you're going to give up that knight, you might as well.
Yeah, that is actually quite true. Yes. Okay. So in this case, how about we take on e5 and then get the knight to c6 with a double attack? And then we can get the bishop on b4 because the queen can go to e4. But then we do the
Yeah.
a3 b4 trick again, I guess.
Yeah, so this a3 b4
Difficult.
trick always comes back. You've mentioned a few good ideas. Carlsen played something different in the game, but we'll get to it. Knight to e5 is one of the
Oh,
possible moves. It leads
okay.
to an equal position. But you basically don't have to go for this knight to c6. You can just go for the a3 and b4 idea. Most likely, black is going to play this, and this would be the position. I feel like, yeah, it's pretty balanced, but black also doesn't really have that many problems with his queenside majority.
You're
So
right. Yeah.
this was possible. A3 was also possible, but it also doesn't give white any big advantage because after takes, let's say you can either take this one or you can also take like this and regain the piece in a different way. But I would say that here as well, black is doing relatively fine, not really losing any material other than, well, that pawn will be regained. And yeah, so the game goes on here and the positions are equal everywhere. But these two were the options. Carlsen decided to go for something a bit crazier than that. So he actually brings the knight back to c2. And you'll see why that's a bit crazy. Basically, also if he goes knight to b3, that's not possible because the queen gets trapped like this.
Ouch.
Or
Yeah.
all these two bishops are just really, really strong alongside with the rook. Instead, he goes knight to c2 and decides to trap the queen immediately. So after rook to d8, the queen is trapped. But he did all of that on purpose.
You might even consider he's some kind of chess genius.
Yeah, because honestly, knight takes on b4, rook d1, rook takes d1, and here we are. We have a
Can't believe
material
it.
imbalance of a rook and a piece for a queen. Do you have a preference in these positions usually? And yeah, whose position do you like here?
Such a good question. Yeah, for you at home, think about this as well. So, first of all, I cannot believe what I've just saw, actually. That is, so how much of a material imbalance is it? So we have one rook and one minor piece for the queen. I believe an engine would say black is better. Nonetheless, the white pieces are a little more active. We're immediately attacking on c5. So the question is, do we even gain one more piece with this little advantage? Rook c6 is one of the next moves, probably. Ooh, very interesting. If I would choose, I would probably chicken out and go to the black side, though.
Mhm.
But it is a tough decision, so it's definitely not clear. Far away from clear. It's
Yeah,
very
you
interesting.
basically have the right evaluation. It's completely equal objectively,
Completely, wow.
but there are both positives and negatives on both sides. For the moment, black has to defend a little bit because that knight is attacked. But after black gets their development in, so after the bishop comes out, the rook comes out, black, of course, doesn't have problems either. And these positions are usually won by either the person who starts an attack, because all the time, these imbalanced positions, the person who starts an attack should be slightly better. or they are also won by whoever is the better player, quite simply, because they're so confusing. They're so you cannot even apply some rules to it most of the time, and you just have to play and find play them really positionally, and find the best ideas. So Navara starts off really well, though. He does a counterattack with a5
Oof.
instead of removing the knight. So, what do you think White should try now?
I I I'm confused because okay, so I'm still confused. So after knight going to d5, which is so obvious,
Yep.
um where does the black queen go to?
So
I only see d6.
yeah, that's what happened in the game, queen to
Jeez.
d6. Yeah, and that's how the game continued. If you had taken this knight, that's also fine, but I think that gives what black some more development. And then
Mm-hmm.
if these two pawns also disappear, then there's really not any problems for black in any of these lines. So you're right about knight to d5. That's a good another counterattacking move
Hmm.
in return. So queen d6, you're right. And you thought that this was good for white?
I Yeah, because mean it's just like I just learned chess, so there's a move where the queen is immediately uh, threatened, and also I don't know. It's just like this piece defending on c5. It's interesting that it doesn't seem to work.
But it
That we
looks
will win the
loose,
piece.
is what
Yeah,
you mean.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. So now, and it is loose because Carlsen gets to collect another pawn, knight to e5. I don't know if you foresaw it earlier, but
I
you were
did
right that
not.
this queen was I mean, that's how it starts. You first get that feeling that something is there, and then there might actually be a tactic there. So there is.
Huh.
Knight takes on e5. That makes the material even now, completely even, now that white has regained a pawn. Exactly, rook plus knight plus pawn for the queen. But this also allows black to develop. So maybe I'm pretty sure it was intentional, or maybe he didn't see other better options. But now that lets black complete the development with the bishop and the rook coming out,
Crazy.
and we get to here. So I always find these positions really complicated.
Yeah.
You don't know which side is better. Um, Carlsen goes knight to g4. It looks like the knight is trapped after something like h5 or f5, but no, there is if you ever play something like that, then there's a knight d to f6 threat.
There's
So
finally this discovered attack.
yes, this tactic you were looking for. So that doesn't work. The queen retreats, and Navara goes for the correct strategy here of trading one pair of active rooks. So these rooks were making a lot of threats for black. It's good to trade one of them and move to this type of position. So who do you think is better now? Do you think anything has changed, or you would still, which side would you still play for?
Now I have the feeling that there's another rook less, and the white pieces are a bit further away. I would prefer to play black, but that probably is not correct.
No, it is equal, maybe slight advantage to black. So
Huh.
actually your feeling was right, but it's very slight. So like
Hardly,
it's
yeah.
not, it doesn't count for, for much.
Mhm.
So the more I see these positions, the more I think it really matters who makes their plans work first. So, if you sit around and do nothing, then either side can lose. Or if you start making blunders, of course, either side can lose. But it's really about whose plan works first, because then that person dictates how the rest of the game
I
is going to
see.
go. So here we will see a lot of maneuvering and leading into an endgame, but I really think that black could have even tried to overtake, for example, with something like knight to e5, and then if white goes for this pawn, then knight to c4. Of course, there's a lot of nuances, but I think if black had really put pressure on the queen side here, then it could be black who had the upper hand with maybe gaining one of these queenside pawns.
Hmm.
Instead, he decided to defend the queenside with g6, And we'll see that instead of this, his b pawn fell. He decided to not defend it, once again for activity. He could have defended it, but perhaps he was scared of something like b4 and then just blocking that pawn, and he didn't want to lose this pawn anyways. So he went knight to e5. Bishop takes. So now I think that every pawn still mattered here, but somehow they both played more for activity than they did to maintain their pawns here. And I guess that's the sign of, good players. They always know when it's worth it to sacrifice and when it's not. So as the side with the pieces, you want them to be placed optimally and most importantly, defend each other, right? Because that's basically what the queen has. The queen can do a lot of checks, can do perpetuals, can do all of these double attacks. So if they're all protecting each other as they are in this game, that's the right strategy. And of course, Carlsen has been playing it really well so far, and he put all the pieces on good squares. Okay, maybe the knight is lacking so far, but we're getting to that position where white will not play with any risks if all of his pieces are defended. These types of positions Carlsen is just really, really good at. So black also goes for the right thing, attacking the pawns. Usually that's what the queen is good at. He sacrifices this b2 pawn to get some more attacking chances. So now the b2 pawn goes away.
Ooh.
We have a sort of a trade of pieces, but white gets to e8. Black just moves the king so that you don't capture with the bishop check. And now queen to c6. So you're forcing a trade of that bishop for the knight. So now we get to this point. It's rook and knight and 2 pawns against the queen. How do you think you would set up here as white? That's quite an important moment because I think there's basically one correct setup here. Maybe a few more, but I think one is best.
You know what is funny? This almost reminds me a tiny little bit of Carlsen versus Nepomniachtchi, the ultimate long game. Was it that there was a queen versus rook and knight and pawns? I think.
I don't remember at this point, but you might remember better than me.
Yeah, you probably at home, you know exactly what I'm talking about too, and you know a little bit better, or you can just check quickly. So thinking about this and about your question, I would try to keep up with this exact plan you just mentioned. I would try to keep every single piece safe, but how to ever defend a3 is the question. Well, oh gosh, I don't know. Because if you give up a3, then a5 might decide the game.
Yeah, you don't want to give up that pawn ever.
But how is there maybe there is a constellation where you can put the rook, the bishop, and the a3 pawn on spots that all of them defend each other.
Yeah, there is a way.
Huh. So that would
Well, you can think of an
plan.
ideal way. You don't have to think about it in terms of, for moves. Let's just say the ideal way. Where would you want to put the rook and the pawn, and the knight is okay for now.
This is such a I cannot really give you an answer. So for me it would be ideal to get the rook on e1 and push the e pawn forward because there's nothing in the path. Simple as that. And help with the knight, give some checks here and there, and then just push to a queen. That would be my personal idea.
So you're kind of close in terms of what will happen next in the game. So next in the game, this e-pawn will become important.
Okay.
And that's white's main winning chance because that's the only pawn that's actually a passer here. So you're right about that as a long-term plan.
Fair enough.
But for this exact position, you also pointed out correctly that we cannot really just lose that a3 pawn for no reason. So the best setup is to place the rook on d4 and then this pawn on a4. That's what you want to achieve.
Okay.
Because the rook is defended there, and from here, the rook will protect both of these pawns. And once you put that pawn on a4, that's just that's just a good way to have it protected forever. And then that rook can never be touched because it's protected by the pawn for now, and then maybe later you might want to push it after you improve the knight and the king already. So the key here is to put the rook on d4. Otherwise, black might even overtake if they end up winning this pawn. So basically, I would say the most correct plan in this position is to go rook to d2 with the idea of rook d4. But of course, black also will try to prevent this plan. So he goes queen to a4 because you don't want to allow that confirmation. Now he attacks both of the pawns. Which one of them is more important?
Well, obviously the a pawn.
Yes, of course, the a pawn. So definitely we are going to protect that pawn and give up the pawn on h4.
But then we have
it. Yeah, to actually achieve that confirmation with the rook on d4 and the pawn on a4. So that was the right plan for anybody who found it.
Well done for everybody who did that.
What's the next plan? That's I know I always bother you with every move. What's the next plan?
No, I'm happy you do that. So the next plan would be to activate the knight and maybe... Well, first of all, activate the knight. Let's keep it simple.
Yeah, activate the knight is perfect. And it's exactly what you said earlier with the e-pawn. The e-pawn is the one that we ultimately want to push. That's the only passer in the position. So once our knight and king are safe and activated, then we can go for that e-pawn maneuver. In these positions, it's kind of more important it's important to calculate every move, of course, but it's even more important to have the overall plan in mind.
Okay.
Because otherwise you'll just keep shuffling and not really, and make one move threats that don't do anything. So these long-term plans are actually the most important in these positions.
Okay.
So that you have something that you aim to
that it's worth fighting for.
So first, he makes space for the king. Now he plays with the knight, so you activate the knight, that's correct. Black plays g4, which looks logical because it helps the queen kind of gain more perpetual check opportunities. But these pawns, because they got so far advanced, they actually become weak, and white is going to win the h5 pawn. So he could have defended it quite simply with the king. I guess he would still lose this pawn eventually because the knight, you see how the two pieces, when the rook is so strong, then it's almost like black is lacking a piece. His queen cannot do as much to protect against everything the knight and the rook will do. So instead, somehow he gave away this pawn immediately. Maybe he thought that the knight would be in trouble or that he has some perpetual opportunities, or maybe he thought it's still a draw. Maybe he thought it doesn't matter. So white gets to escape the perpetual checks though, and there's king to g6 now. For now, the position is still equal, so there's no decisive advantage for any side, but it is more black who is playing for the draw. So the way to defend it was very subtle and I think very, very hard for black. So he had to basically defend this pawn and target the one on f2 whenever there is a chance so that white cannot activate. So something like this would make sense. With the king, keeping the king on the e file was important so that there is no e pawn advancing. But this is pretty difficult. And you'll see why I'm saying with the king there, because in the actual game, Navara went king to g5. It's a totally fine move for now, but it doesn't stay consistent with that long-term plan. So because we know that white's long-term plan is to push the e pawn, what happens next? As I said, Carlsen is really good at these positions, and he plays exactly the right move. So that cuts off the king, and now this pawn can start moving without too many problems.
So there's, of course, this is so interesting and fascinating. So
yeah,
for me, I would have probably done the bad thing, which would be an immediate draw. I would give a check to the king and collect the pawn on a5, and then black will collect the pawn on a4, I guess, quite easily, and that's it.
Yeah, that's true. Or the pawn on f2, I guess he has to choose which ones to give up. Yeah. But yeah, I think black would just regain the pawn on a4, and in that case, that's probably I'm not sure who exactly it favors, But I guess the less pawns, the less black has to defend. So you will see that these two pawns become important in the endgame that we will look at. So slowly but surely, white gets to that plan, and you see all the pieces are protected, so it's impossible to really prevent any of it from happening. Black, of course, will try to give some checks, but it's impossible to do it forever because this knight to d6 move is actually really good. It protects the b7 square. It's kind of subtle, but it protects the b7 square so that basically if the king goes to g2, there's no queen to b7.
No, funny. Because
It's
that would
close,
have been, yeah.
it's not. Even queen h3, you just go back, and then every time white gains one more move, and there's never a perpetual check.
Crazy.
So in the actual game, he played queen to e6, trying to protect it. Now, essentially everything wins, but you can try to find the most forcing win now.
Yeah, it has to be rook f5 check.
Exactly. So sometimes you have to change the position into even a pawn ending if you're sure that it's winning.
Yeah.
And here, I'm pretty sure we are certain of that because there's two extra pawns, so we know that that's a winning pawn ending. It's actually only wins by one move, so that's pretty funny.
Ooh.
You can play a lot of moves here, so of course, any king move is fine. E6 is fine. He
E6
went
was an
f4.
idea, yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, f4 is
Nice forcing
very,
move.
very good, actually. That
And
is
nice
the
forcing
best
move.
move by far. My God. Yeah.
All of them win, so there's
Okay.
not really, absolute best move, but I like this one because it
It's
makes the
so
calculation simpler. You
so
don't give
clear,
them
yeah.
choices. So that activates the king. And as I said, it only actually wins by one tempo, I would say. So the game ended here, where black resigned and Carlsen ended up winning it. But here it's only one tempo where if it was black to move, he would play king c5 and everything is great, or king c7. But white is just in time to get to that critical square and to promote the pawn later. So that's how this game ended. I thought it was also a unique material imbalance. So I
Totally.
hope you enjoyed this masterclass game from Carlsen from the Biel Chess Festival and that you learned something new today.
100%. This is rising to one of my favorite games. I like it for many, many reasons. So thank you so much for showing this to us. Very, very instructive. And make sure at home to check out the Fritztrainer from Svitlana, Material Imbalances, to get a little bit more knowledge about those positions. But you know that, of course. So we see each other soon enough. Bye bye.
See you next time.